Pizza and Grill. We just heard, of course, there from Danica Patrick talking about how she likens NASCAR to being a football and not knowing exactly where you're going when you get bounced about a bit. We are very happy to have on our bench racing hotline Lee Spencer from FoxSports.com. Hi, Lee.
Hi, how's it going?
Hey, it's going terrific. And I know you couldn't hear the clip, but we just heard Danica talking about how being in NASCAR is like being a football, and when you get dropped on the ground, you don't know where you're going. I guess that's kind of a good analogy.
Well, she said on Saturday, I guess her media availability was on Friday. She said, people asked her what she learned in Daytona, and she said she learned how to crash. And she got pretty proficient, with it after crashing in the duels and crashing in the nationwide race and crashing in the cup race. I think she knew everything about crashing that, you needed to know, but really didn't want to ask about.
You talk in your article here about some of the 10 lessons learned out at Phoenix about Denny Hamlin, and I thought it was kind of interesting. You're talking about relaxed and refreshed, and that's kind of the feeling that I think that he got. And I think that's one of the things that Charlie and I talked about earlier was that Darian Grubb may not have been the perfect fit for Tony Stewart because he was too laid back. But does that laid backness that he has, does that kind of translate well to Denny Hamlin?
I think it's good for Denny Hamlin, but Mike Ford was pretty laid back, except for when, the last year Mike was just kind of spent. I mean, he was just wasted, and I don't think either one of them were effective. I don't think either one of them. I think they had just kind of hit the wall with each other, and I don't think that they were good for either one. Now that being said, when you look at you compare Darian Grubb to somebody, say, like Greg Zipadelli, Zippy's pretty laid back, too. His demeanor's pretty calm. They're very different in a lot of ways, though, where Darian has a classical education. He's got an engineering degree from Virginia Tech. Zippy went to, the School of Hard Knocks and just came up, in the Northeast racing modifieds. And so, very different kind of backgrounds for those two. I think it was a lot, there were a lot of other things that came into play with the whole Darian, situation because, someday I think it'll all come out. But, they tried to sweep it into a fancy little bow at the season finale and just kind of left it at that. But I'm telling you, it was one of the most awkward championship celebrations I think I have ever been to.
Absolutely. One of the other, speaking of awkward, I guess, is the fact that Dodge has this brand new Charger that they're going to unveil, their 2013 Charger for next year that they're going to unveil next week. And the only one that really signed up to use the doggone thing so far is Robbie Gordon. That's a little awkward.
Oh, it's way awkward. I mean, I think it's, strange. I mean, when you look at what, all the happy, joy kind of attitude everybody was sending around during the media tour in January, in Charlotte, no one saw this coming. I mean, certainly Ford had been looking for somebody. They're looking for another powerhouse with, top-of-the-line drivers. They really want to win a championship. And I've got to say that, whatever support that they gave to Penske, it probably ended up cheaper than having to buy the contract for the two drivers when you look at what they spent for Carl Edwards last year. So not only do they get a phenomenal organization with Penske Racing, they're going to have, two of the brightest young talents coming up in the sport, A.J. Allmendinger and Brad Keselowski. And, quite frankly, if you put those two in a comedy club and put them up against, Carl Edwards and Greg Biffle and, Matt Kenseth's a great guy and he's got a great personality, but you really have to pull it out of him. But, I think that, those two are diametrically opposed to one another, and it'll be just, curious to see how the two organizations either feed off of each other or, use each other to push the other forward.
Have you heard anything at all as to who Dodge might be trying to court other than, I know the rumors were out there about Richard Petty Motorsports just because of the rich history with Chrysler Corporation, but is there a leader in the clubhouse as to anybody that might go to the brand?
Well, the whole thing with the RPM bunch, Doug Bergeron and Andy Murstein, they came in and kind of, revived that place. They resurrected it from bankruptcy pretty much, just over a year ago. And so I think that, looking at that organization, they're up for the highest bidder. If that money comes from Dodge, then, so be it. They could be using this to leverage, Ford, trying to get a bigger budget out of Ford. I know that Andy Murstein asked Toyota for a meeting, and they met the first week at Daytona to discuss if, going to Toyota would be an option for them as well. So I think that, there's certainly a lot of different, people out there, places to look at. Furniture Row was another organization that I heard of. They've got a lot of engineering steps over there. They just, they're in a technical alliance with Richard Childress Racing. And, when you look at situations, you have a lot of partnerships out there, but you don't have a lot of people that could be that guy, that could be that team that specifically can provide all the wherewithal to do to be a Dodge flagship operation, because whoever it is going to have to be able to build their own engines. And, there's not a lot of people out there that can do that don't already have, an engine program in place. I mean, the days of just throwing out money like they did to Bill Davis, for like the last decade, when every time a new manufacturer came along, whether it was Dodge, Toyota, or whoever, and he was able to build his own engines, I don't think you're going to see companies spend that kind of money, in the modern era.
We're talking with Lee Spencer from FoxSports.com, and go ahead, Charlie. Sorry.
Hey, Lee, what's your feeling on any likelihood of the appeals from the 48 team having any positive effect for that team? That seems to me like such a almost like a travesty, but I can't see NASCAR probably reversing anything.
Well, when the season started, would you have expected Dale Earnhardt to be the highest Hendrick Motorsports team as far as being in the points and everybody else being out of the top 20? I mean, my husband, Reed Spencer, he thought Casey Kane, was a lock for the chase, if not to win the entire championship. And, Casey's had a couple of rough weeks. Mm-hmm. Jeff Gordon's had a couple of rough weeks. Jimmy Johnson was lucky to come back and put up a top 5 to kind of balance out that 42nd place finish at Daytona. So, when you look at the Hendrick organization as a whole, this is not how anyone would expect, a juggernaut like Hendrick Motorsports to start the season out. So, the whole thing with Chad and Jimmy, I talked to Rick Hendrick about it on Saturday. We talked to Chad on Friday. Their whole defense is going to be the fact that NASCAR never laid a template on the car and they just took it. Rick Hendrick said that he had run that car, with those C-posts flared out the way they were at every restrictor plate race in 2011, which if they're illegal now, then that means they cheated through those 4 races last year. He said he'd been to the R&D Center twice. And so, you have a situation where NASCAR has seen these C-posts, in at least 4 times before it even got to Daytona and up close and personal at the R&D Center. So, I think that it's going to be curious to see what happens. They might get it, their fines reduced a little bit, but I don't expect it to go away entirely.
Well, it seems, Charlie and I talked about it in the first part of the show tonight, is that when you look at something like this, and like you said, that car has gone through inspection numerous times. It's gone to the R&D Center. They could never find anything wrong with this. And then all of a sudden to have an inspector look at it and say that it was illegal without a template going on there, this is the kind of crazy stuff that the casual fan looks at NASCAR and says, these people don't have a clue what the heck they're doing. This is the stuff that makes this sport look stupid.
Well, I had issues with the 2 cars, the 48 and the 5 car 2 years ago during the chase when they left over. And we had heard if you do anything to the new car, you're subject to major penalties. So what happens? They have the 48 and the 5 car. They go back to the tech center, and, they say that their both the cars are off after it's over. And, you know, what happens, instead of it being black and white, which had always been the case, you know, anytime you talk to John Darby, the series director for Sprint Cup, you know, he said any infraction with the body would be black and white. Then he brings up this thing, well, you know, it's like a stoplight. It's red, yellow, or green, and they're in the yellow section. Well, that completely goes against everything that he had said prior to that moment. And, you know, we just found that really curious and fishy. So, you know, here we are 2 years later, or, you know, 18 months, whatever, you know, and Chad's still doing what Chad does best, which is be an innovator. And, you know, it's a cat and mouse game that they take great pleasure out of. And, you know, Chad's been playing that game with Darby since Darby was an inspector up at Rockford Speedway in Illinois, you know, back in the, 90s? So this is absolutely nothing new with those two, and you know, it'll probably go on for as long as they're both in the garage.
All right, before we let you go, we're starting our 64 greatest driver basketball style NCAA tournament again, where we take two drivers and pit them against one another. You can choose whatever criteria you want to use to debate these two real quick. We have a play-in game this year to get into the last 64th spot. And I'm going to ask you who you're going to choose. And the two that you got to choose from are Danica Patrick and Louise Smith.
Wow. Well, you know, I'd have to go with Danica because I see her week in and week out, and I wouldn't want to piss her off.
That's the best reason I can think of. Lee, thanks so much. We'll see you when you get around town.
You guys take care. Have a great week.
All right. Thanks a lot. Lee Spencer from FoxSports.com. Now, that's